Hello, everyone. My name is Monica Fernandez. I'm the media manager at Red Hen Press, and I am so honored to be moderating this incredible event at LitFest Pasadena this afternoon. Forgive me if it sounds like or looks like I'm reading. I'm also a writer, and I definitely express myself much better in writing than in oration, as I'm sure many of you writers can relate. The setting of a story is one of the most important parts of any narrative. Place and location play a vital role in the development of the plot, of the character, or of the person or writer themselves. This panel is titled Our SoCal DNA. Shout out to Tom Costin for that great title. And it couldn't be more fitting for these 6 prolific writers whose Southern California roots permeate their writing in ways that make clear that our place, that your place, is ingrained in you, ingrained in your very DNA. We've assembled an unbelievable lineup of writers across genres for you today. We have memoirist Deborah Lott, novelists Aimee Bender, Ryka Aoki, and Natashia Deón, and poets Michael Torres and Luis Rodriguez. I was hoping to start off with brief readings from each of them, of passages they feel encapsulates how they illustrate their SoCal DNA. It's my hope that wherever you may be watching us from, you'll be able to feel, hear, see, and smell our Southern California. Let's get started. Ryka, can you take us away?
Of course. So this is my forthcoming book, Light from Uncommon Stars. And it is, it's a trip that spans the galaxy, but it comes home to the San Gabriel Valley, where I'm from. And so in this passage that I'm about to read, the character is coming home to harvest a soul. So here we go. How many years had it been since she had last driven these streets? So much had changed. If anything changed was the one constant here. Shizuka's childhood sheet music store had gone first. Then Foodland, with its cute baggers and wobbly shopping carts, became Diho Grocery, finally a Hong Kong bank, anonymous behind its darkened windows and marble facade. And now the elementary school had yielded to a Mediterranean casual apartment complex, complete with mixed-use shopping and underground parking. And tonight, young people would be crowding these sidewalks, perhaps lining up for Japanese crepes or Taiwanese shave ice. Now, this was very different from Tokyo, where there was almost a desperation to be either at the forefront of change or to guard against it at all costs. Be it Harajuku, Meiji Jingu, Akihabara, each was defined by its strict relationship to and profound respect for change. Here, though, change had occurred with so little fanfare or notice that, well, it become mundane. Of course, some places remained curiously resistant to change. Fong's Burger was busily serving its pork bones as usual, out of its greasy side window. And Amy's Pastries still displayed the same dusty wedding cake with the lopsided pillars and 3 dead flies. And there were the greasy, glistening, impossibly fragrant ducks and pigs and cuttlefish dripping in the window of Sam Woo Barbecue. Yet none of these places appeared to be doing any resisting. Changing with the times? Heck, Fong's didn't even wipe their countertops with the times. And as far as preserving tradition, Sam Woo was now happily promoting its new deep-fried fish skins. Yet, there they were, and there they most likely would always be. Yet another of Shizuka's landmarks was now ahead. Shizuka did not visit her childhood home very often, but the pond at Almanzar Park had always been one of those favorite places, one of those few that held happy memories of her parents. Over time, the park had added softball and baseball diamonds, resurfaced the outdoor basketball courts with a non-slip coating. The city had added tables with chessboards, a fitness park course, and expanded the tennis courts. There was even a lawn bowling club that had come and gone. And yet, there was always that bench by the same old pond. For much of her life, it had been a place where she could come to think, to contemplate, to be alone. And now, with nowhere else to go, it seemed as good a place as any to be.
Amazing. Thank you, Ryka. Amy, how about you next?
Love hearing that, Ryka. And similarly, this is a character, this is from my latest book, The Butterfly Lampshade, and the character spends some time in Burbank, is living in Burbank. And this is just her thinking and being in place at the same time. So that's why I picked this passage of just the ways that we're in our own heads, moving through a landscape, and that is often what life looks like. And she's kind of going over these uncanny events, which won't make sense, but you'll just kind of see her thought process there. As I turned the corner and began to walk home down Victory, a necklace of red and white tract housing looping through the soft curves of the Verdugo Hills, a squirrel darting across the sidewalk eating a half-eaten fig. It did strike me how opposite it was from the dead butterfly that had emerged from the lampshade at the babysitter's apartment, or the dead beetle that had exited the paper on the train, or the dried roses so many years later that had dropped from the curtains at Dina's. 3 visitations, 3 events. I passed the homeless man with his painting display of still lifes and the dancing person wearing a giant arrow suit pointing to the television and video game console store across the street. I had not spent much time thinking about these episodes since that terrible visit to my mother's facility 10 years back, when I had sent her over the back of a chair. But as I pressed the button for the crosswalk, I thought for a moment, for the length of the red flashing hand, that it might be worth my own time through some other way to consider them again. The light changed and I moved myself between the yellow lines, past the row of humming car grills, past the pool supply store and foam mart, thinking about the shop and how I might improve my speed of delivery for it, and admiring in my mind the new pale green ceramic sugar jar and creamer I'd found that weekend at a yard sale in Sherman Oaks, and what sort of background might best showcase their most delicate porcelain beauty.
Thank you so much, Aimee. That was wonderful. Natashia, you're up next.
Hi there. I'm going to be reading from my novel that's coming out in November. It's called The Perishing. Los Angeles has always been brown. And unlike all the other great American cities, New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, Boston, there is no sensible reason for Los Angeles to exist. Los Angeles was born with no natural port, no good river connections, no suitable harbor sites, and no critical location advantage. And precisely for these reasons, because being born with very little and having no safe place are the fuels for the greatest imaginations. So Los Angeles would rise, because imagination and enthusiasm are the currency of world builders. On the night I arrived in Los Angeles back in 1930, Betty Ann Muley's body washed ashore. The call of her death reached me there in the alley and cradled in my lap. It was what woke me that night, but I didn't know it yet. And had the world's nations not been paused between 2 world wars and been in the throes of the Great Depression, others might have heard her body splash down into the Pacific too, or seen the man carrying a large burlap bag with someone wrestling for her life inside it. But as it was, there was nothing to report on the poor dying woman until it was too late. Her husband, who later confessed to her murder, said she stopped living as a proper wife and it put on too much weight. She was dead long before he killed her, so she wasn't a victim. He was. Or if she was a victim, he was too. And city prosecutors would say, in part, that he was right. There was a double homicide because Betty Ann was 26 years old and 7 months pregnant when she died. Her white breast and thighs by then were like plump pillows, half stuffed into cases, resting on the frame of her small bones. But her husband called her fat. He said it in a way that made fat seem disgusting and ugly. And when he spoke the word, his bottom lip would tuck back behind his front teeth, and he'd spit out the word with a chunk of his lip in a shower of spit. But she was a masterpiece. Because if you've never stood in the glow of a fat woman, you've missed a sunrise.
Thank you so much, Natashia. Deborah, you are next.
Yeah, so this is my book, Don't Go Crazy Without Me. It's a memoir partly about growing up in a family of leftist Jews in a very Republican, very Protestant neighborhood. Our new development in La Crescenta was made up of single-story ranch houses, painted in pastels of blue and pink and tan, with gingerbread trim around the shutters that featured cutouts of songbirds and Valentine elves. The very appearance of these dwellings argued against anything dramatic going on behind their doors. When we moved in, the tract had not yet been finished, and sawdust scented the air. Our street, Teasley, terminated in a canyon where my brother Paul and the other boys in the neighborhood hunted for lizards and arrowheads. The cross street, Briggs Avenue, turned and twisted up the hill to an elevation of over 3,000 feet and then dead-ended in the mountainside. On rare winter days, we could drive to its top and see snowflakes fall and stick to the branches of the pine trees. Our streets seemed made for bike riding and impromptu football games, the yards for summer barbecues. My father never let me participate in any of these neighborhood activities. My bike would careen down Briggs and be struck by a car. A football would hit me in the head and give me a concussion. Barbecue smoke gave us both asthma. Distinguished from its neighbors by the mezuzah on its doorframe and its placement high on a hill on the corner, our house was one of the few on the street with a porch and a view. If our neighbors chanced to look out their own windows in the morning, they were likely to catch a glimpse of my father on that porch in a bathrobe that never stayed closed long enough to cover his naked body. He'd wave as he checked the outdoor thermometer or demonstrate his patriotism by hanging an American flag. On a clear day from that porch, we could see the peaks of Mount Baldy, the gray, smudgy outline of City Hall in downtown Los Angeles, and beyond that, a narrow blue strip that was the Pacific Ocean. My mother hoped our elevated location with neighbors on only one side would keep my father from feeling hemmed in. On a good evening, there might be a breeze, and he could look out at the lights of the city 30 miles away. But that view only intensified his longing for escape. He fled whenever he could into the city, to the May Company and Bullock's Wilshire's Art Deco tea rooms, and to Los Angeles's grand movie palaces and established synagogues with congregations large enough to fill balconies for Saturday morning Shabbos services. He craved pageantry, ceremony, excitement. My mother, serene stability. Too much stimulation might give her a migraine. Thank you.
That's so great. Thank you so much, Deborah. Louise, you're up next.
Well, hello, everybody. And I will be reading a poetic passage from my last book, which is called From Our Land to Our Land. This is a book of essays that appeared just before the pandemic, so we didn't really get a chance to promote it. So it's good, an opportunity to let people know about it. And it goes like this. Los Angeles is where Santa Ana winds scatter dry leaves and droughts make tinder out of the formerly green. Where wildfires are metaphor and reality for our internal and external terrains. Where the city is music, but also muscles. A rain dance often with no rain. Neon glared, smog-tinged skyline held together in a spiderweb of freeways. It's a place where even jacarandas and palm trees are transplants. This is where the city's buildings are bricked and nailed together with survival stories, war stories, love stories, the kind of harrowing accounts Los Angeles unfurled at 3 a.m. when ghosts meander along the upturned pavement or rumble by in vintage cars and all-night diners convert into summits for the played-out, heartsick, and suicidal. There's a migrant soul in this rooted city. Skid Row next to the Diamond District, waves of foam against barnacled piers, cafes and boutiques next to botanicas. Ravines and gullies turn into barrios, rustic homes with gardens and dot bleak cityscapes, and suburbs burst with world-class graffiti. Fragmented yet cohesive, Los Angeles demands reflection on ourselves and the unstable ground we call home, where people die for lack of a roof or food or compassion. As renowned LA writer John Fonte would say, these persons are songs over sidewalks, imaginations on the interchange, humanity that deserves connection, touch, breath. These roads, bridges, and alleys also contain concertos. Breezes over the ocean's darkest depths are replete with harmonies, and a howling moon and red sunset serve as backdrops for every aching interlude. Los Angeles is where every step rhymes, where languages flit off tongues like bows across strings. Skateboarders and aerosol spray cans clatter in a daily percussion, and even angels intone, "We can do better," while haggling at garage sales.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much, Louise. Michael Torres, you are closing this out.
Oh, cool. So I'll be reading from the collection, and this poem, I wrote it when I first went back home to Southern California after moving away from that. It's called "My Hometown as a Man Riding a Bicycle with No Chain." His legs, a too quick clock, a kind of cruel that tells me any time away from home is too long. Pomona becomes a man asking if I want to buy his MP3 player. He raises headphones to my face. Listen, he says. No one believes him, but he doesn't say about what. It's how they say yes, but don't look. I nod. He talks about his daughter who works at AutoZone, who's the manager now, the jefe. But his son, who I'm certain I went to school with, who walked into 5th grade one morning with shaved eyebrows and sat down without saying a word, who never spoke to anyone ever again, he does not mention. Not even once. Where have all my classmates gone? Where I grew up has nowhere to live, but he says he'll be all right, he'll be all right, he'll be all right. Because the lady from the next block over owes him for mowing her lawn. And have I seen a Bible around? No one's going to pick it up, he says, not unless it had $100 in it. Wouldn't that be something? He's nodding, he's balancing himself on the bike, he's trying to leave, but will I be here tomorrow? He might be around, my town's always around, so how about that MP3? I can keep it if I want. No, how about for $10? My town is presenting its calloused palm, now my town relentless, pedaling like everything is all right, like everything is all right, like a Ferris wheel no one's going to ride. Look at it spin through the evening, each basket scooping sunlight, then shadow. The carnival worker we turn away from calls for us and keeps calling, long after he knows we're gone.
Thank you guys so much. That was incredible. I really appreciate you all taking the time to find passages that illustrate LA and kind of the place that we come from. I was writing notes and I loved how everybody kind of illustrated different parts of LA. It was idyllic, but also sinister, unsuspecting, sparse and unknown with so much potential. So thank you for sharing that. I want to get started with a question that's a little bit broad, so take it as you will. But I wanted to know how much you think location impacts or inspires your writing, and in what ways. I noticed kind of the poets and Deborah in her memoir were speaking very personally about the effects of the place that they had on your life and the way that you view yourself in your life. And then the novelists were sharing much more kind of inspiring potential of the city, but also kind of the nitty gritty of it all. So what do you think, like how much do you think about like where you come from and how much plays into how you write? How about we start with Ryka first?
Hi, everybody, and wow, this was such a cool reading. For me, with Light from Uncommon Stars, I had the chance to talk about dreams and oh, sorry, there's something in my phone. I'm sorry about that, but the idea was that I wanted to. There's been a lot of Asian American violence. And for some of you, that's new. For those of us who are, we grew up with it. And I really wanted to write a novel about where I grew up to show that we have stories to tell. We laugh, we joke. There's really good food, and if you just stopped and read the stories, you wouldn't make so many assumptions. So for me, a lot of this was political. I wanted to write about my place and my neighborhood and say, you know, we deserve a chance to contribute too. And I think also that because of the language barrier with so many of our communities, it can be intimidating for people to come in. So I wanted to bring a little bit of that to show, you know, behind the signs that you can't read, there are human beings.
I love that. That's so great. Natashia, how about we go to you?
For me, you know, I'm writing about 1930s LA, so it's sort of the golden age of Hollywood. But I wanted to focus on the Black and Brown experience. And that's why the first chapter starts with Los Angeles has always been brown, which is something that wasn't attributable to LA at that time. And also I wanted to write a story, and for me the setting is about being a watcher. So no matter what language we speak, our eyes don't lie. Like, we are watching each other, suspicious of each other, and still experiencing things that way. So I wanted to bring in all of that into this story, but also tell the Black experience, which was rich and vibrant in that time. And growing up, my closest friend was Korean. And I didn't even know that there was a difference until I moved to the suburbs. And it was the first time where everybody was white, and I realized that there was something expected of my character as a brown person, which hadn't existed before. So I wanted to bring to life that friendship, fictionalized, and that story, because to me, that's what LA is. It's putting things aside, being who we are, but also watching a lot.
Definitely. Deborah, how about you? Oh, sorry.
I think there's 3 specific places that are almost like characters in Don't Go Crazy Without Me. I mean, there's La Crescenta, where we felt very othered as a family. And then there's the San Fernando Valley that was becoming a hub of Jewish life, where I would actually have to import boyfriends to La Crescenta from the valley. And then there was the city, where my father really longed to be, where we couldn't afford to live. So those 3 locations were really different places that served almost as characters.
Yeah, and you can definitely tell in your book. How about, let's go to Aimee.
I love hearing all the readings and the responses. It's, I guess maybe what I would say, I grew up in LA, and I think part of the tension for me, and I think it's probably true for anyone in a world metropolis, is that you have the city that is sort of known through, particularly LA, through film, TV, and then the city that is the place where you live, which is a daily encounter with regularity and complexity and nothing really like what the TV and the film looks like. And so there's something about that sort of living inside myth, but also inside dailiness, that I think is part of what interests me in general in writing. And so to think about, in writing about LA specifically, like what is it like to walk down the street? You know, these things, these sort of rumors of LA as sort of like not being a place you can walk, or all these things where it's like, no, obviously people are moving around with their bodies in the city all the time. And so what does that actually feel like? And to kind of ground that while still, like, I think that sort of seeps in a way regularly in my own writing, and feels like kind of an important way of thinking about the city to me. What does it really be here versus this sort of legendary place that doesn't really exist?
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that. I actually have another question that speaks quite to that point, but I'll get to that in just a second. How about we go to Michael next? How does LA affect you in your writing?
So for me, a lot of my work right now is based in like the characters and like what the characters go through, and just listening to everybody's readings, like I think everyone mentioned like a part of LA that and like Southern California that I think of, which is that there's always boundaries, like visible and invisible, and my characters are always having to like navigate that and deal with that. And so like location is crucial because I need to place the reader in the position of LA or of Pomona, and with those sensory details, so that the reader can also see like how my characters react and resist and like go through all the things that they go through, and that can't happen without being located and being able to like find yourself in that place.
Yeah, exactly. Louise, how about you?
Well, LA and me are chemically bound. So everything I write about can't separate itself. And so of my 8 poetry books, my best-selling poetry book is The Concrete River. And we know what the Concrete River is.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have a short story collection called The Republic of East LA. It tells you everything. And then I have a novel called Music of the Mill, which is about a steel mill, but people think steel mills are only in the Midwest, when LA had steel mills, auto plants, had everything. I worked in them for many years. And so the mill is in LA, and it's about a steel mill in LA. And I want people to know how vast and complex the city is. And I agree with Aimee, there is a mythology about the city that everybody talks about. One of the things that really bothers me is when people in LA talk bad about LA to other people. So why would you do that? I mean, LA's got a lot of problems. I get it. But I don't know any other city that people that do that except here. And especially other people who love LA. This guy from Britain was sitting down with this lady, and she was complaining about LA. He goes, I think LA is one of the best cities everywhere. And I remember talking to this one Russian immigrant lady who said the reason she loved LA was because of all the Mexicans. Who says that except people that aren't from here? You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So I think that's the way I look at LA. It's just part of who I am.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And that also speaks to my next point, which is as a writer myself, I've done a little bit of traveling. I've been lucky enough to travel, and I tend to romanticize a lot of the places that I go to, like Italy or London or something, and I get inspired and I start writing something, but I feel like it's all kind of surface level. Like it's the idyllic, like the prominent, like the perfect version of like this city or this country. Do you tend to lean into kind of romanticizations of LA, but it seems like most of you kind of don't. Most of you resist that and really want to illustrate like the nitty gritty, the nuts and bolts, all of the streets of LA and what it means to actually live here and grow up here. So does anybody have, I'll kind of open this up. Does anyone have anything to say about that?
I have a respect for LA in a way that's not really romanticized, but it's balancing like the fear and the power of it, kind of like sex or like the ocean. Like you respect it, you can appreciate it, but you also respect it. So for me, especially as a criminal defense attorney, like I can walk out of the courtroom in downtown LA off of Hill Street, witnessing, some horrendous things in court, murders and things like that, and walk out and appreciate the buildings and appreciate the way that the flowers are littering the ground. So that's what I think about when I think of LA. I see it for what it is because I'm in the heart of it and I work in the heart of it. And when we moved even to the suburbs, it was the week after a person was murdered in front of my house. But I still go back there and think fondly of chasing the ice cream truck down the street, of speaking Spanish to Oscar, my neighbor, and his family. So it's a respect of the power and the beauty at the same time.
I'd like to add something to that, if you don't mind. I love that. I think one of the ways I look at it is that I write about, I guess they were called the gritty side of LA. I'm not sure if that's the right thing. But I find that you can't help but get close to all the stereotypes of LA, including of the people of LA. You can't help it. But I think the key to a good writer is to know how to artistically, poetically subvert that. You got to get right next to it, though. And that's the hard thing. You got to get, like I write about cholos. So easy to stereotype cholos, the easiest thing in the world. But then you get into a way to subvert what you think cholo is. like the cholo who's writing poetry while he's sitting in juvenile hall or something. You know what I'm saying? The kind of things that you just have to use to get people to see that there's more to the people of LA, to the city of LA than what people would imagine it is. And that, I think, takes a little mastery from a good writer.
That's so great.
Ryka, go ahead.
I think you're muted, Ryka.
So I was picking up on what both Luis and Natasha was saying. I mean, we have these stereotypes and we work with them. I mean, I have Asian characters. They're going to be driving. What do you think's going to happen? However, to me, I think that LA, when I go to other cities, I feel LA has such a more advanced and nuanced version of racial and socioeconomic diversity and how it kind of fits together or doesn't fit together. In Koreatown, I saw, a billboard advertising Korean ramyun in Spanish. And for a lot of the country who thinks of diversity as black and white, there are no black people, there are no white people. And by the way, ramyun is a Korean take on a Japanese product that was brought in from China.
Wow.
So there's so much here. I think the other thing is before I stop is that because we have an expanse, things don't butt up against each other involuntarily. If I get sick of non-Asians, I can just go to Rowland Heights and not see any, and I'm good. And I think having that sort of, because LA is so vast, there are places that we can go and develop so much of our culture relatively undisturbed. And I think that helps increase one's pride in where one comes from. And I think that strengthens stories as well. We think of LA as a city with no center as a bad thing, but to be honest with you, it's pretty good for writers.
Aimee, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I agree with that about the no center part. And I just wanted to add something to what Luis was saying, which is I think sometimes there's an essay by Borges, and I think it's about the Argentinian writer, I believe. I just don't remember the name of the essay, but he has this amazing quote where he talks about a writer from the Middle East would very rarely write about a camel. But a writer who's looking at it from outside might be like, look, there's a camel. And it would be sort of, but that you wouldn't, I think the palm tree would be sort of the iconic LA thing. And I don't think any of us, there was a mention, right? It's like, so there's something about from within what it looks like and what you notice, but also how could an LA writer take on the palm tree and sort of reinvent it in such a way so that the image becomes something different and we get to re-see it? Because what happens is we just get so kind of acclimated to certain iconic representations of a city that then how do they get renewed by the writer? How do we see a camel freshly? How do we see all these things? And so I just like this idea of sort of sidling up to the stereotypes and seeing how that's being part of our job to kind of make it new. The jacaranda tree, whatever particular thing is. I mean, there's all kinds of things that could show LA in that way.
Oh, sorry, Deborah, you are.
I'm just coming off what Aimee just said. Like there's a lot of stereotypes about the freeway and how terrible it is to be stuck on the freeway, but there's a very particular kind of reverie that you can get into when you're driving on the freeway. And I have written the beginning of many, many pieces while driving on the freeway.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. Michael, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I feel like as someone who grew up like an hour away from LA, I feel like if I were to write it, or at some point I might have actually romanticized like about like visiting LA, because I could always like dip in and dip out. But I think whenever I started going into it, like kind of like Luis had mentioned, like kind of, and a couple of other you had mentioned, like staying there for a while, like my characters sort of realized how naive they were to the situation, because the city was a lot more complex than what we could only romanticize. Like that ideal idea and is something that comes from it's like tourism, right? It's like temporary, so you need to kind of stick with it and realize it's a lot more complicated than what I think Aimee mentioned about the someone writing about the camel. Like, it's way more complex once you like look at it for a lot longer.
Yeah, I love this conversation. I'm learning so much. I'm currently working on something that where LA plays a prominent kind of part in the story. And Ryka, I love what you said about how like the different communities, there's like pockets of places where you can foster your own culture. And I'm Filipino, and West Covina is like the Filipino center of the Southland. And so, you know, and I grew up just 15, 20 minutes away from West Covina. So I know, and I'm looking forward to kind of writing a little bit about like what West Covina is like, and how that has kind of fostered my Filipino identity. And I love the talk about us kind of like nudging up to these stereotypes and subverting them in a way. As I said, I'm learning so much, and I feel like I'm like taking all these notes, and I'm going to be using them as I continue to write. So thank you. I'm going to ask one final question about kind of where LA plays a part in your writing, and then I'm going to move towards Southern California as like a community, a literary community. So my last question, is there anything about Southern California that you haven't written yet that you kind of want to? That there's this little nugget of like, oh, there's something that's happening there, and I kind of want a chance to like write about it. Or do you think that you've kind of all encompassed what you want?
I think there's a lot of things that I want to write about. I want to write about Vernon, you know, the whole city. I want to, like, there's so much happening. However, I might not be the writer for that. And I think that sometimes I was telling my editor, yeah, I could write another character. I can write this Latina character and bring out more, but why don't you have a Latina writer? And they can, and I think that I know that we should expand what we write, but there are so many voices in Los Angeles that the story that we write probably has somebody there right now who's talented and just needs that nudge, that mentorship, that break to write a story that's going to blow us all away. Yeah, so that's kind of where I am there. The other thing that I just want to say before we move on is that when I was writing about the San Gabriel Valley, there's this feeling of selling out your community to sell a book. So there are times in my book where I will play with different names and I will move things around. So I fictionalize a place that I really want to depict truthfully, because when you're writing about a community, there's the people who you're writing about are involuntarily included in the narrative, and you don't want to exploit them.
That's a really good point.
So I just wanted to bring that up too. But LA, if you're a writer in LA, there's so much out here.
Yeah, I would agree. There's a lot of gaps. There's a lot of communities that get missed. There's so many places. It's rich, and we haven't tapped really the surface. The other thing I think would be good to write about is I agree with what's being said about, the problem is we get pigeonholed, and so LA to me is different people living together. I get the segregation issue. I get the restrictive covenants. I get but for example, I started off in Watts. It was a Black and brown community then. It still is. And nobody talks about Watts or South Central that way that much. They talk about it as a Black community, but it's actually been Black and brown. And there's interactions and there's ways that we influence each other as Black and brown people that I think was very important, that makes LA what it is. The low-riding culture is one that I call the nexus of Black and brown. People don't talk about it that way. They shouldn't understand it. I also spent many, many years in the San Gabriel Valley. It was my barrio. It's where I came from. San Gabriel Valley was my home. And it's brown and Asian. And there's interactions there, and there's mostly good. I mean, the thing is, all these things is not about all the bad tensions that people have. They're there, but really it's how you get to know each other and love each other. And then when you're in the valley, and again, Mexicans are in every one of these communities now, so then you can have Black. I was in Reseda when I was 7 years old, when it was all white. Now go to Reseda now, it's all Mexicans, Armenians, and Blacks, all kinds of people. It's not the same, but I was there when it was all white, and then you get that tension of being chased around because you're the only brown kid in the school and everything else. But then you learn how to interact with people who are also white. The other thing I want to add, the white thing is a weird thing in LA, because I lived 15 years in Chicago. And the difference is that Chicago, if you're Irish, if you're Polish, if you're Ukrainian, they call you that. You know what I'm saying? You go to LA, everybody becomes white. Doesn't matter what country you come from, what immigrant, everybody was white all of a sudden. And they used to say Anglo, and Anglo's like the worst thing you can call them, because some of them Anglo had nothing to do with it. You know what I'm saying? It was really weird in LA that white people became this amalgamation. And unfortunately, it's mostly their fault, because they owned the best businesses, they had the best houses, they were in the best neighborhoods, and they had the restricted covenants and things. But I think it's weird, because when you go to places, other parts of the country, they do divide. This is an Irish neighborhood. It's just, it's really weird how white became this one weird thing in LA, and therefore I think white becomes a big problem in LA, because it's like black and brown. At least I look at it from that perspective, has a big, huge, monolithic thing called white that we're struggling against all the time, when it really isn't a monolith. If I can make that clear.
Yeah, that's awesome. Anyone else have anything to say about the parts of LA that you kind of wish you could write about, or that you plan on writing about? No? All right. Let's talk about the community of Southern California and beyond. All of you are educators in some form. Louise, you've done some incredible work with fostering writing and creativity, both during your time as Poet Laureate of Los Angeles and outside of that. Natashia, you are a 2017 U.S. delegate to Armenia as part of the U.S. Embassy's reconciliation project between Turkey and Armenia. Michael, you moved from the San Gabriel Valley to the Midwest recently and have fostered a really fantastic writing community there. You've all done a great bit of traveling in the promotion of your books and your literacy initiatives and projects. And I wonder, is there something distinct about this writing community in Southern California that you feel might be extraordinary? Something you might inherently, perhaps without even realizing, be taking with you on your travels in hopes of recreating elsewhere. I also wrote, this is a really long question block, so I'm sorry. But I wanted to note that, like, we're all from widespread sections of LA. Michael and I are kind of from the San Gabriel Valley, and as he noted, we're about an hour away from LA proper. We are in Santa Monica, Pasadena, USC, Mount Sac, and before COVID, we were all willing to brave this notorious LA traffic to attend readings, to support each other. And I just wanted to know, what do you think this says about us as a literary community, how we can be so widespread and yet so tight as a supportive literary community? What do you guys think?
For me, doing all that, I always wanted to know, like, what was going on now with the literary scenes, because there were so many different ones. We were at Mount San Antonio, but we would go to Long Beach, and we would go to all these other spots, and like there's some sort of like a positive energy infused competitiveness about it. Like, I wanted to see who was there, what they were writing, what they were saying, and do something that when I got back home. And I like to do that now. Like, I like to encourage the other writers, but I'll drive, I live in a small town, and I'll drive the hour and a half to the Twin Cities where the big literary scene is. And people be like, oh man, you drove all the way up here. And I'll be in my mind, I was like, I always used to do this. Like, this is what you need to do. Like, you want to be involved and in the mix. And I don't know, like, I love that. And I feel like I felt that energy all the time in the LA area. And I just, that's what I love about the LA lit scene. And that's what I try to sort of keep on doing here.
Fantastic. Louise, how about you? You have so many projects.
Well, yeah, I'm doing so many things, and I'm working in these prisons. Obviously, that's another big area. LA County has one state prison, that Lancaster. So I was there for many, many years. I only stopped doing the in-person instruction because of the pandemic, but I'm still doing lesson plans. And now I'm in 2 other prisons besides that one. That's one area that I think is important. But the other one is that, I think, having lived in Chicago, which has completely different city from LA. I mean, completely different. People can't find a way to connect those two cities. But I found two things that I found very rich. One, they're both highly industrial cities. And that's one thing about LA that I think people miss. LA is the largest manufacturing city of the country. Not Chicago, not Detroit, not Pittsburgh. It's LA. We never talk about it. We don't deal with it. There's hardly any working class literature of LA that I think needs to happen. Because I think that's one thing about all of Southern California for me. It's a working class place. Much more, and I don't want to put down Oakland or San Francisco, they're not a working class, but much more than the Northern California. Central Valley is the same thing. Working class people, they're in the fields, they're working. And I think we need to write more about that aspect. Because obviously when you're in Chicago, the city, broad shoulders, people right away, they get it. This is steel mill, this is, all this stuff. And we don't get that about LA that I think would be very important to keep the Southern Cal end of it. This is a highly labor. The reason so many people come here is to work in whatever industry was here. And why we have all the world, practically the whole world, almost every part of the world is represented here is because of the work and the working class ethic and the working class struggle. I think it's important.
That's so great. Deborah, how about you? I know Don't Go Crazy Without Me is your first memoir. It is your first memoir, right?
Memoir, yes.
Yeah. I know you had another book before, so I was like, and you've done quite a few literary events. I know during the pandemic, they've mostly been virtual, but have you noticed anything about the way that LA-based bookstores or something do things versus anywhere else?
Well, what I'm really proud of about our LA literary community is that there's this kind of conjunction between the social justice community and the writing community. Where I teach at Antioch, LA, where we have a thriving BA program in creative writing and an MFA program in creative writing. And it's taught really in a context of social justice activism. So I don't know if that's the case with every other writing community, but I think that's really one of our strengths.
That's really great. Natashia, do you have something? Oh, sorry, Ryka, go ahead.
Yeah, I have go ahead.
Ryka, I think you are still muted. Oh,
Should I just go?
No, hold on.
Hi, okay. So I think that LA, there's a warmth to the LA writing community, and it lasts, it lingers. So, I'm sitting here and I see Aimee and we're in a panel together. The next time we might not talk to each other until whenever, but it's still, hey, how are you? And there's something really nice about that. I think it has to do with Los Angeles as a whole, where we can be very, very isolated if we want. I don't have to see any friends if I don't want to. Whereas in San Francisco, when I'm there, I'm getting involved in drama. I can't even go to the supermarket without running into anybody. But here, you can find that cafe. You can find a place to write, and you can do it undisturbed. There are cafes where you're the only one writing in Word. All the other writers are using Final Draft because they're screenwriters. And so when we meet, it's by choice. And when we meet, we make it matter right away. So when we go places, when I go to the world stage or something, it's a choice. So when we're there to give, we're there to share, we're there to listen. And I think there's a generosity that doesn't get played up very often in the LA community about LA writers. But there's this really quiet warmth we have for each other. And I really like being part of it.
That's so great. Natashia, did you want any final last thoughts?
Yeah, my final last thought is I think that what makes LA the best writing community in the world, having been different places, is there are no gatekeepers. If you want to have a reading in your panties at a club in Santa Monica, you can do that. And people will show up and support you and hug you. And having run reading series like Dirty Laundry Lit and The Table with your mentorship programs, it's about showing up, especially you, Monica, writing about Filipinos, especially in the Asian diaspora. When you're writing something where Filipino literature is the least covered of all groups, even though you used to be the second largest population in the country. Now you're the third as a Filipino. but your literature is lacking. Like all that, I want you to show up. Like we have to encourage each other, show up, clap it up. And that's what it is to be in LA. There's no New York gatekeeper saying, no, you're not good enough. You haven't written enough. You show up and do that shit. That's what LA is about.
I love that so much. All right. I think I have to wrap it up. But Aimee, did you have anything else to say? I think we didn't get to you.
No, I love what Natasha.
Okay. Okay. This was incredible. I wanted to express my deepest gratitude to these unbelievable panelists. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. And for the viewers, we hope you enjoyed. Thank you for tuning in. And please, please, please don't forget to pick up the latest books from these authors. You can get them at litfestpasadena.org/authors. Stay tuned for another poetry interlude, and the Our Culinary Table panel is up next at 2. We will wrap up and say goodbye. Thank you to everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Monica.
Thank you.